Speaker of the House of Commons is a very respected position. They have to be a pillar of good behaviour. It's a pretty unique position in Parliament. They're elected and generally they're taken from the opposition benches. Other major parties won't stand against them at election. So it's effectively a job for life or until you want to retire. They're the presiding officer, so they decide House debates, who gets to speak, which amendments are selected, what the process is. And they have delegates as well. They also punish members for breaking rules. And it's very important because it's a strictly non-partisan position. You don't get to take part in debates. You don't get to vote unless you break ties. And even then, convention is that the Speaker casts the tie-breaking vote according to Speaker Denison's rules, which say you should vote the way which leads to further debate. It's a great position for an MP who loves Parliament, respects the process, represents Parliament with the best of behaviour, and frankly, who's not going to become Prime Minister or a senior minister. I look back over my lifetime. I remember Betty Boothroyd, who was a no-nonsense, strict, straight-shooting, fair and level. Michael Martin. John Bercow, who was controversial to say the least after Brexit. And now Lyndsey Hoyle. And I must say, I like Lyndsey Hoyle. I've always respected Lyndsey Hoyle. I think that he has, with the odd exception, been very fair and level. I think he was pressured last year when he allowed an extra amendment. His selection of amendment was rather curious and came rather soon on the heels of a meeting with Keir Starmer. Well, Keir's job is to achieve what his party wants. A little bit of pitching is fine. I don't like it, but, don't have a problem with Keir trying. I was somewhat disappointed that Lyndsey Hoyle appeared to have caved to some pressure. And then there came the Southport killer. Well, the nonsense that we couldn't discuss any questions around him was firmly laid down by Sir Lyndsey Hoyle. Well, how it's contempt of court to discuss the charges that are actually being raised is a very curious question. You can't exactly prejudice jurors by telling them what the charge is going to be. But we didn't tell anyone what the charge was going to be, and frankly I think the word is misled and lied. Not Lyndsey Hoyle, but the government deliberately said that this wasn't terrorism and shut down debate and actually caused and fuelled the riots and disturbances last year by trying to bury, using the excuse of contempt of court. And Lyndsey Hoyle went along with the establishment. I don't particularly blame him for that, but I was disappointed. But now I am quite intrigued by his expenses. He seems to have run up £250,000 on 19 international trips in about 2.5 years. It took John Bercow a decade to run that up. And frankly, love him or loathe him, John Bercow and his wife, I can't imagine being too scared of spending a bit of money and having a nice lifestyle. I would expect him to have a nice trip when he does a work trip. Not to think, well, I'll go to Burger King to save people money. He's representing Parliament, but it took him 10 years. Whereas Lyndsey Hoyle flies first class to Dublin or Italy, If you've ever flown to Dublin from Heathrow, it's one of those flights where by the time the plane's got up, it's on the way back down. You'd better go to the toilet as soon as the seatbelt sign goes off. How you could explain needing business class or first class for that, I struggle to comprehend. Italy is a bit further. But then when he went to Canberra in Australia, he spent £40,500 on the trip. 33,000 was on first class and business flights for Hoyle and his two staff. And it seems wherever he goes, he needs to be accompanied by staff. He's a very busy man. He went to Qatar for £13,000 and spent £11,000 on those flights. And then he stayed at the St. Regis Hotel in Doha, where his subsistence bill was £811. No wonder MPs can't understand the needs of the common people when they think subsistence is £800. And when he went to the Caribbean, he chartered private planes. I mean, I'm sure Montserrat's lovely, as you can see from the photo on the thumbnail. But why does the Speaker of the Mother of Parliaments need to go on a fact-finding trip to the government of Montserrat? I'm sure their parliament is perfectly well behaved, but it's a bit odd that he needs to fact-find there, since their parliament's largely based on the processes that he has in his own. And then there's all these trips to Gibraltar. Well, he's Chancellor of the University of Gibraltar, not because he's Speaker, but as a separate thing. And he needed to go on a 4-day trip to a graduation ceremony. I understand he needs to be there, but how is that government related, and what does that have to do with Parliament? Because his job is parliamentary business, not government business. He's not going there to represent our policy towards Gibraltar. He's going there as the Speaker of the House of Commons. Well, frankly, some might say he's going as the Chancellor of the University of Gibraltar and billing the UK Parliament for it. That's what some people seem to suggest. And then he went business class flights, £19,000 to Jakarta and Singapore, 21,000 to Tokyo, 15,000 to Jordan. What is the Speaker of the House of Commons learning or doing which is work related in Jakarta, Singapore, Tokyo, and Jordan? Don't they all seem nice places? When I went on work trips, sometimes they were lovely, very nice cities, and I made use of those visits to enjoy the city in the evening. But I more often ended up in some small town in Belgium or 50 miles outside of Paris. Whereas he always seems to go to such nice places. The sort of places you'd want to send a postcard from. And then there seems to be a love of chauffeur-driven cars. So he went to LA and Canberra, that trip we mentioned earlier, and between those he spent £7,500 on chauffeur-driven cars. I mean, possibly that's just a term for a nice taxi, but it seems to be a bit of an odd choice. I mean, LA is a horrific city to drive around. There's more roads and cars than you'd want to ever see in your life squeezed into one city. And it's a very spread out city. So I'm sure he had to go to different places and he needed to travel. But surely the British Embassy, well, it's actually a consulate in LA, surely they have a car. This was work related, this was parliamentary business. But £7,500, very nice. I don't think Lyndsey Hoyle will go over this. I hope not. I think he's a good speaker overall, and I certainly respect him. But I think there have to be some serious questions over why the Speaker of the House of Commons needs to make so many trips, why they need to be so expensive, why some of the extras could be justified, like £500 for extra cases, because he needed to take special equipment on this. He's not James Bond. He's a process junkie. And that's meant in the nicest way. Maybe they need to change fact finding, pass it out a little bit. So you have fact finding where you're actually finding facts, and you have goodwill where you're representing Britain. But Labour seem to have an inordinate number of problems with expenses. Lyndsey Hoyle seems to burn through money like it's candy. Lord Ali throws around access to properties to not just half the cabinet, but also the Labour Party's campaign coordinator. Seems to have claimed £40,000 in expenses to rent the house next to his. And some of these issues with expenses go back even further. Rachel Reeves claimed £29.93 for a bottle of Moet and Chandon when she was customer relations manager at Halifax Bank of Scotland back in 2009. Which would be great, except that the colleague she gave it to never received it. And the pettiness goes on. £4.92 for biscuits for an away day. £1.34 for a birthday card. Well, I've worked at plenty of places where we gave a birthday card, or where we had some biscuits at an away day. Now, if we had a proper breakfast, or a proper lunch, where we laid on a nice platter, we expensed it. But if you got £4.92 for biscuits, what's that, a tin of biscuits from Tesco's? You don't expense that. And really, I could talk all day about the expenses that Keir Starmer, his family, and his colleagues have claimed. It just seems like a government who enjoys spending other people's money, enjoys getting freebies and free rides and comped. Parliament, where the Speaker never needs to go to places like Brussels or Amsterdam, but does get to go to Montserrat, Tokyo, everywhere sunny and nice, right? How unfortunate. No wonder we have so much respect for our MPs when they have such a hard life. I'm old enough to remember the expenses scandal. The MPs that paid their parents' mortgages with expenses. The MP who had repairs to a duck house in his duck pond in his house, which apparently was a parliamentary expense. And it was a messy, dirty business, and it discredited politicians. Well, in less than a year, Labour have managed to discredit Parliament with profligate spending of their money, our money, on their pleasures. Maybe apply some common sense rules. Most companies have a rule about first class. Nobody gets first class on flights less than 2 hours, or only people above a certain seniority get first class on intercontinental flights. I flew to North America with a senior colleague. He got in first class because he was on the board, and I didn't. I went in coach because I wasn't on the board. I think this and Rachel Reeves' expenses as a junior manager in a high street bank tell you a lot about the sort of people running our country. I wondered what our Speaker of the Mother of Parliaments, as we love to call it, would learn from the Parliament of Montserrat. And I'm afraid I was uninformed on the Parliament of Montserrat because there isn't one. There's a legislative assembly which has 11 members who are in 3 parties and a history of 10 years. Now, I would love to hear what facts were found from that. How did British Parliament change their processes or approach to things when they visited 11 people in one room representing 4,400 people? Considering the average British MP has between 69,700 and 77,000 electors in their constituencies, you could fit 15 Montserrats into a single parliamentary constituency. But how many British parliamentary constituencies have Palm Beaches? No doubt these are facts that were gleaned from this fact-finding mission.